Congratulations, you've just found the #1 over 50 health and wellness podcast on the planet. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert and the founder of The Silver Edge, and I am on a mission to help men and women just like you build lean, strong, healthy, capable bodies they love for the rest of their lives. Today, we are diving into a topic that hits close to home for many of us in our 50s, 60s, and beyond. And that's the complex, emotional, and often exhausting journey of caring for aging parents. And joining us for this conversation is someone who's not only walked this path, but who has written the guidebook on how to do it with grace, perspective, and yes, even humor. Howard Miller is my guest today, and he is the #1 bestselling author of Burdens and Blessings, a lighthearted approach to middle-aged folks dealing with aging parents. His book is a heartfelt and humorous take on the very real struggles and surprising joys that come with stepping into a caregiver role for our parents. Through his own personal story, Howard invites us to embrace life's challenges with levity, resilience, and compassion. We talk about the difference between being a good son or daughter and a dutiful one, how to deal with family dynamics when roles shift, and how to find those little moments of joy and laughter in the midst of grief, sadness, and loss. This episode is all about the intersection of aging, family, identity, and growth, and I think you're going to walk away with a renewed sense of perspective, whether you're currently caring for aging parents or just starting to think about what the road ahead might look like. Without further ado, let's meet Howard. Hey folks, just a quick heads up. If you've been thinking to yourself, I need a real plan to fix my metabolism and actually keep the weight off this time, then you're going to want to hear this. We have just opened enrollment for our 10-week diet prep school, and for a very limited time, we're making it available to the public. Now, we usually reserve this for our challenge participants only, but we do have a couple available slots right now. Now, note that this is not a diet. This is a 10-week metabolic reset designed to repair your metabolism, rewire your eating habits, and get your body primed for sustainable fat loss. In this 10-week program, you're going to get a customized nutrition guide built for your goals, daily bite-sized lessons and accountability, access to our entire Over 50 workout library, weekly group coaching calls that are live, and a private supportive community of people just like you. And all of this for just $495. We kick off things Monday, May 19th, and spots are very limited. So if you are ready to take the next step and finally build the body that works for you, head over to the show notes for this episode and grab your spot now. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's show.
Hey, Kevin, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really excited to dig into our topic today here. I was telling you right before we hit record here that a lot of our audience, or all of our audience really, are going to be in their 50s, 60s, some of them in their 70s. And we all have, if we're lucky enough to still have our parents with us, we all have aging parents here. So I want to start here, if you don't mind. So your book, as we mentioned in the intro here, is Burdens and Blessings, a lighthearted approach for middle-aged folks dealing with aging parents.
Yes.
Why don't you start by telling us your story, how you came to write this book? And I suspect that has to do with your parents, right?
I would think so, yes. Since
Mm-hmm.
thank you, yes. Absolutely. Again, great for being here. The reason I wrote the book, first, it's not my first book, so I had written, but they were more like when I was coaching, I had a book, You're Full of Shift, and then a book about management skills, The Manager Trap. So writing wasn't foreign to me. And what happened is, as my parents got older, my life, well, it was pretty independent, but that kind of started to shift. I had to have more and more responsibility. This took 10, 15 years. I can't tell. I can't remember. So did my brother. And it started to be more coordination. And, looking back, I had over 350 Word documents with lists of home care agencies, assisted living, which they didn't go to, medicines, doctors, just all these situations, these things that encompasses my life as we were taking care of them. So it was natural for me to want to write about it when both my parents passed. My dad died at the age of 99,
Yeah.
In July of 2021. Mom lasted a little less than a year and a half, and she was 92. And it was a way to process my grief. Honestly, Kevin, that was the first thing. I mean, grief it doesn't evolves goes. You go through different phases of it, but it was very cathartic for me to write all this down, all the burdens and then the blessings. And
Yeah.
that's the name kind of just popped up as I was writing it. And what I realized after I wrote it is others can relate to it, not
Mm.
just family. I've had people, like, there was a line, I thought it was a throwaway line in the book. Through this whole process, people would say to me, "Oh, you're a good son." And Kevin, I didn't like that because I didn't feel like I was a good son. I felt like I was a dutiful son. Some of my thoughts were not good.
Yeah.
Some of the stress I had, it's like it was too much. It wasn't good. And a lot of people connected to that line. So I found that the book not only helped me, helped others. And what I realized is the subtitle, Lighthearted Approach. It's about levity and how you could use that, not just with, at work as well. How can you be more, what is levity and lighthearted? So that's kind of where the whole book came to play.
Gotcha. Well, it's interesting that right there in the beginning, you brought out a couple of really key points I'd like to dive deeper into. One is
Sure.
that, hey, I was living a pretty independent life, and then
Yeah.
as my parents were aging, all of a sudden I had these new responsibilities, new caretaker responsibilities. I do want to unpack that a little bit, but I find it fascinating that you mentioned, because my second bullet point, I've got a little some bullet points here. I wanted to make sure I talked with you. My very second bullet point here was, hey, welcome this guy to the show. The second one is, talk about what you mean when you say that difference between a good son and a dutiful son. Because, like you had mentioned, you said, hey, maybe that I just kind of threw that line in there and it was impactful. Certainly, as I read that, that was impactful. I think that as we move into this phase where we're watching our parents age, there is a little bit of that dichotomy of, hey, what part of me is a good son, what part of me is a dutiful son, and there's some complex feelings to unpack in there. What am I feeling in here? Is this guilt? Is this shame? Is this? Do you want to talk a little bit about your own personal journey there and kind of separating that good son from that dutiful son, and maybe any advice you have for people that are perhaps dealing with some of that, because that is a complex and nuanced thing that you're talking about there, that difference between a good son and a dutiful son, or, and for our audience, a good daughter or a dutiful daughter.
Right, and I think the word is nuanced. Here's
Mm-hmm.
where I remember playing tennis as I do, and I did throughout the whole time. Taking care of yourself is essential through it. But I was playing tennis with someone around my age who had a dad exactly my age, but he was estranged from his dad for years. Only heard about his dad through other family members. And I said to him, "Well, when your dad passes, will you feel like there's anything unresolved?" And he said, "No, I'm good." And Kevin, I got a little jealous because he
Mm.
didn't have to go through, the things as far as being interrupted, the phone on and being constantly there. And it was something I was honored to do, but can I do it on my own time? And that's where I feel, is that a really good type of person? A lot of those caregivers, when you think of them in the true sense of the word,
Mm-hmm.
that's not me. That's not me. And I suspect that's not a lot of us. And then all of a sudden you're in that situation and you can lose patience. They can lose patience. It gets stressful. So if a push comes to shove, it's a nuance. And yes, it's because of guilt. And do you own that? Do you earn the word? But it's like when you reflect back, did you do what you could? Did you go? And so I did, and that's why I was able to also to reflect back and feel good about it, even the stuff that maybe could have gone better, because it could always go better. So anyone who doesn't feel these thoughts, I think most people do at some point. You're in the middle of it, not like it's going to end at some point, right? Because we all die. If
Yeah.
as but sometimes you think, it's going on for quite a while.
Yeah, and
So,
that can be tough. And that can be really tough, I think, for obviously for the person going through it, but it can be for the family, the loved ones, the children, right? To watch these elderly parents as they're coming towards end of life. And there's a lot to unpack there, right? There's my own mortality, there's my
oh
parents'
yes,
mortality, and we're facing these and these, as a young person, it doesn't really, I mean, you have some existential angst about death probably, but it's not very real until I think until we hit kind of the age that we are, right? Men and women in their 50s, 60s,
yeah.
70s. Again, if you're lucky enough to still have your parents and you're watching them move through these phases of end of life, it's really tough to escape just these thoughts of, the end is the same for all of us, right?
Well, I was the blessing is I saw two parents get older. There was no major illnesses. No, I mean, no cancer. My father
Yeah, that's amazing.
was 99 with his mind. He broke his hip at 94, and 90% of people in their 90s usually die within a year. He
Hmm.
lived 5 more years, and
Hmm.
I remember. So they were very productive. I'd say through their 80s. And I remember I was with them, and one time they said to me, "How does it feel hanging out with old people?" And in reflecting on that, they weren't old when they said that. I mean, age-wise, maybe for some people, but they weren't old in their mind because when you really feel that way, you don't say that, right? Because I
Yeah,
saw them go
yeah.
even further with that. So, yeah, oh, absolutely. You see what's going to be. I saw a lot of my parents' contemporaries go before them, but it's until it's your parents who are getting older. Oh yeah, that's happening. Oh yeah, that's gonna happen to us too, right?
Yeah,
So,
I feel like obviously you're blessed, right? You had
yes,
would you say your dad to the age of 99, and then
yeah,
mom went a little bit later did you say 92? Is that right?
92.
92. And there is this concept of obviously we have longevity, how many years you have, right?
Right.
And we have this lifespan, how many years you're here. And then we have this concept of a health span, how many of those years are healthy. And we have this other way of saying that, which is the compression of morbidity. And what that means is, are you starting dying basically at 60 or 70 and just dragging it out over your last decade or decades because you have poor metabolic health, be some sort of disease, your lifestyle diseases, etc. But it sounds like you had this incredible example with your parents being alive, being vibrant, having this perhaps compressed period of morbidity and this longer health span. Is that fair? Were they healthy people? What did they do to live to be 99? And you said, "Hey, Dad fell and broke his hip at 95 and still lived another 4 years," or whatever that looked like.
So yes, they were for most of it. I mean, my mother towards the end it was not. There was no quality of life. Well, my dad lived that long because he's stubborn. No, but actually,
Okay, right,
well,
okay.
I mean, my mother was an athlete actually Basketball Hall of Fame at Brooklyn College and
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and she played tennis, which I followed in that. She played till she was about 80. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it was tougher for her as she sciatica, stenosis, and then the macular degeneration with her eyes. She couldn't play
Mm-hmm.
anymore. For a while, it was okay. You switched to something else. There was walking and there was other activities being very social. And my father was along for the ride. It was like kind of he he once said to me, and I believe this. He said, "If your mother goes first, I wouldn't last a week." And I kind of believe
Mm-hmm.
that because he got better because of well, he said he got better because of her and my brother and myself. He had to do something about it, right? But we certainly helped him to do that. So I believe that they mattered. That's what it was. They mattered. They voted. They were involved with the world, and they stayed involved with the world. And my father, I mean, probably watched too much of the news, but it kept his mind going. So and for him it was the mind and contentment. I asked him probably, I think it was Father's Day of the year that he died, because he kept saying he was going to live to 120. And I'm like, what's the reason you want to? Right? I was curious. And he said he's curious about what would happen, with his family, about just what will happen in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
after he passed, I took a step back And I looked around and like you look at trees, how long do they live? As human beings, we're not here that long. So I
Yeah.
got what he
Yeah.
said, right? So for
Mhm.
the longest time, that's how they lived. My mother had all these, I couldn't imagine being an athlete and then one thing after another, and then beginning of dementia started. So she lost her spirit. She lost her spirit. And you knew that when she wasn't, as some of her comments were always a little bit sarcastic or just and when that stopped happening, you knew she was getting weaker. So my brother said, "No wonder my dad didn't want hearing aids." This is after he passed. No wonder he didn't want hearing aids. He didn't want to hear her all the time. So
All right.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So they were obviously a good example of humor for you. We're going to get to humor and levity here in
yeah,
just a minute.
yeah.
I want to pick apart. So I'm the oldest of four. Both my parents are alive. And I'm wondering, as my parents are aging, what that dynamic looks like between my siblings and I in
Yes,
terms of responsibility. Now, is it just you and your brother?
that's correct. S-
How did the responsibilities, did you guys just naturally divvy things up? Was there contention there? Was there harmony there? What did that look like for you guys?
Yes. So I would, yeah, the answer is, was there contention? Absolutely. Was there harmony? At times we had a common goal. How you're going to relate to each other starts with how you relate to each other now.
Mm,
And whatever underlying issues you might have with any siblings, somehow they surface. And that's, at least that was my experience. Things that you may not even have knew, but your sibling says that seems to can come up because you're dealing with very stressful situations. How it can, part of how you can divide it up. First of all, some siblings, someone wants to do it more than the others. This peer that I used to work with, she has a lot of siblings. She wants to take more responsibility. Now, does she ever resent it at times? I don't know, but that's what she chose to do. A lot of it has to do with geographics. While there's a
mm,
lot you can do if you don't live near them, if someone does live near them, they end up, if as long as don't completely ignore it, having a little bit more responsibility. My parents lived in Florida, but then mostly in LA. My brother's in LA, I'm in San Francisco. So he said, ultimately, if there's an emergency right there and then, it's on him, unless he's out of
yeah.
town, right? So and the way we split it, well, part of my 350 documents, I handle all the finances, all the relationships with the doctors, although my brother was on the doctors as well, because you find, yeah, I my mother my mother wanted a pill to make everything better. Who wouldn't, right?
Hmm.
But when you go to your doctors, and if they just want you to shut up, they give you a pill. And when
Yeah.
we got involved, I mean, we had to get her off oxycodone. It was just, and she had big stomach issues. Well, that contributes to that, right? And my brother was very good because he could get on the phone with the doctor and just casually mention he's a lawyer, and suddenly
Hmm.
things come. So there was a lot of where we both did a lot. There was nothing, we both we were involved every day. We spoke several times a week. In fact, at one point we said we should talk about other things, and you couldn't. You couldn't. I mean, you could on the side, but the conversation had to always go
Yeah.
back to, yeah.
Be
So,
dominated by that, yeah,
hmm
by that subject. That's easy to see. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. Very often the daughter, right? Or like you said, it's one sibling who has that caregiver sort of gene, if you will, or just naturally. And maybe it's the middle child who is always the peacemaker in the family. But I can see how naturally one person would step into that, we'll just call it a leader role, take the initiative for aging parents. But what I'm wondering, and I'm kind of imagining as I'm thinking through this scenario, is does that build up resentment in that one sibling who is kind of taking charge, and what does that do to the other siblings, kind of psychically or psychologically, emotionally, as are they in denial? Are they pulling back? Are they pitching in? Just all things that I think. until I started to prepare for this this interview, frankly, I really haven't given a whole lot of thought to, right?
It's good. That means your parents are in good health right now, right? So
Yeah,
that,
yes,
yeah, I have
relatively so. Yes.
yeah, I have a friend here, and they hate his 60. His parents are, early 80s. It hasn't started with them. Yeah, there's no doubt there can be arguments. Let's hope that they're not. Money isn't one of the arguments, although that adds a
Yeah.
whole nother element in it. And I
Hmm.
didn't have that. Uh, yes, there'll be resentment on any end. I'm spending too much time on it. My sibling who's taking charge won't let me do this. Whatever it is, there could be resentment. I joke, the pandemic made it even tougher for us. With my brother had this theory. My parents was Florida. We took them back and forth, but they were there when the pandemic hit, and my father didn't want to come back. But then we got them to come back, and my brother thought for them to be safest, they should live with him. And in theory, that's correct, except when you're working full time, and and I had to go down there, and that was pretty intense between both my brother and myself. In my book, I said we cursed at each other more than curse words in a Quentin Tarantino movie or an episode of Succession. We were just at each
Hmm.
other's throats, and but you hopefully you bounce back from that after you go through it. It was just a very very tense time. So there absolutely can be. The thing is, if you all agree that someone should be in charge, you have to let them be in charge. They might want to, the challenge with that is, if you're not involved every day, you still can have a viewpoint that might make sense, right? But when you're in it every day, you're stuck in the weeds, and you may not see something else, and it takes communication. And sometimes if there's a main person, they might be too tired to even listen, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of, yeah.
It's just it's a very fascinating role reversal. All
Oh
of
yeah.
my life, I was, my parents are my parents. They took care of me. I think about, I have adult kids now. They're
Right.
they're grown ass children, or
Right.
adults out in the world,
Right.
and yet me to a lesser degree. But my wife is still very much in that provide, protect sort of. She's still in that caretaker mode to these adult children.
Hmm.
And it's just funny to think that someday those roles are going to reverse, right? She'll get to a point, hopefully, if she lives to a ripe old age, say she's in her 90s, and my son or daughter is going to be there as a caretaker for us. And just like my siblings and I will become more caretakers for our parents as they are on this journey. And it's like you said, in the title of your book, there's hopefully room for some lightheartedness. I'm already seeing it, right? I mean, those of us in this age demographic, probably our parents struggle with technology, which at times can be frustrating and times can be kind of funny. So I'd like to just segue here from kind of siblings and responsibilities of caring for our parents to your book is burdens and blessings. So I don't think it takes a whole lot of imagination for us to envision the burdens. Many of us already have those.
Right.
Let's talk about the blessings. Let's talk about, because you talk about joy in this process. You talk about humor. You talk about levity. You talk about taking this lighthearted approach
Or
for
hearted.
dealing
You
with
can't be light, but lighter. Right?
lighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. Talk
Yeah.
talk about that. How do we shift our mindset so that we're finding some joy in this journey?
Yes. So first, I have to say that levity doesn't necessarily mean you have to be funny all the time, right? And I happen to be blessed with growing up with humor. We just
Mhm.
always had that around. And so when I wrote the book, I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but storytelling is a way of finding some lightness in it. The stories could be, hopefully, you have some stories from the past that just make, if well, I don't know, four siblings is a lot more than I have, but maybe all of you have the same story and you all smile and laugh about the situation, and you remembering those stories in your current times, whether you bring that up or not, that absolutely can help, right, that brings a lighter hearted approach getting some joy getting some joy in the moment. Recognizing that this is a point in time. I mean, all of us, it's a point in time, right? This moment right now. But when you have I'm weird. When I was in my 30s, for a while, when my parents left messages, I saved those messages. I don't think I did it. That's, although at the end I did because, oh, but now, of course, with technology, with videos and everything, you have that. But you know that when you're starting to take care of them, that there's an end, right? The end is when they go. So it's a point of time. Thinking about that and wherever they are and how appreciating that could add some lightness in that moment. To be maybe that, like if you're a little frustrated, it helps you take a breath. Well, there's a little bit of joy in that, right? Slight self-deprecation, right? Not
Hmm.
beating yourself up, but that's if one of your parents is starting to lose balance or something like that, and you could say to them, I'm doing that at my age, right? So that you can. My father would not recognize that he fell. He would not recognize he fell. He wouldn't use a cane, a walker. And when I was with him once when he went to the doctor, and he looked the doctor square in the eye and said, I don't fall, I stumble. So,
Hmm.
and so which was funny in the moment itself. I was furious at one point that he wasn't doing that because I felt it was an accident waiting to happen, which it was, right? And and I would get calls from either my mother or a cousin. He fell, and I talked to him. He wouldn't do it, but when he said that and I was there, I just cracked up because I mean, he honestly saw the difference between a stumble and a fall. It was
Sure.
pretty
Yeah.
funny, and that there's a joy in that as well, right? The way I look at it, we at the end we can't control when someone's going to die. And the same token, if they're making decisions, unless you strap someone down, they have their lives and their choices, right? So I
Yeah.
found that pretty funny. So that's just kind of like looking at the humor of that moment. So those are some of the ways, and just so there was if you have the lighthearted, there was when my brother and I were really angry at each other, and my mother said to my father, the boys aren't speaking. No matter how old we get, we're still the boys. The boys aren't speaking
Yeah.
to each other. He goes, because of me, I might as well be dead. And I walked in the room and said, "Don't you die? He'll blame me for that." so,
Yeah.
those are different ways to find joy. I could keep in for my mom, particularly after my father died. You put on a Don Rickles comedy routine, she was hysterical, right?
Hmm.
Just getting her to laugh in that moment. There's
Yeah.
joy in that. I found joy in. Okay, this is an interesting one. I found joy in helping them move around. Again, like holding my mother's hands as we go by, or helping them get in the car. That could seem like a cumbersome thing, and let's say it takes a little bit longer to get somewhere, right? But
Hmm.
there was joy in doing that.
Yeah.
So,
Finding joy in those small moments and remembering this practice of gratitude. I can see how all of that would enhance this experience, right? Because the
yes,
experience is a lot of what you make of it, right? Not to say there's not dark times, not burdens, and obviously
right.
end of life isn't always joyous, but there can be joy found there. I do find that that's a fascinating, at least meditation, right? At my stage of life, kind of envisioning, the next decade, let's say, in my case. So I'm kind of curious, as you've watched your parents live long, healthy lives, how has that impacted you in your, say, health and wellness journey? Are you careful what you eat? Or are you careful what you drink? Or do you have a exercise practice? How have your parents' longevity and lifespan and health span, how has that impacted you personally, or has it?
Oh, absolutely, it has. Well, first of all, for some reason in my 20s, I got into the health kick. So I've always had that. So I feel very lucky, and that continued. I mean, I think my father died a late Saturday night. Now, I know he did, and I got down to LA. On Monday morning, I was at the gym on the treadmill. I was, crying on the treadmill, but I was on the treadmill.
Hmm.
But, you look at what do I want, what don't I want, based on the experience. And I hope Kevin, I hope I'm not as stubborn. I hope I'm
Mm.
not as stubborn and I accept help. And one thing I'll admit, and it was either the end of last year or the beginning of this year, in my shower, I slipped for a second. I got on Amazon and bought a bath mat because I thought, what a stupid thing to have. No, and I thought that, no, and I'm
Yeah.
actually serious. I'm very proud of myself for doing that because I'm like, who needs it? Just, I don't, I mean, I'm still very active and I want to be as active as long as I can. So it has impacted me because I know that even if I'm lucky to have what they have, that's still less years ahead than there are behind. How do I want to live them? And
Hmm.
what was very interesting is my father, this is just a few weeks before he passed at 99. My brother talked a lot about his work and he could talk to my father about it because my father would listen. I mean, my brother would be stuck in traffic and just talking. And he said, and so after my brother was done, my father said to him, Andy, it'll work out. And if it doesn't work out, it worked out. And
Mm.
my brother told me that after he passed, and we both like, he didn't live his life that way. But if this is what he told you a few weeks before he went, this is a message. And that's the quote in my book. And it's a mantra
Hmm.
I use every day. You're stuck on a decision. Well, if it doesn't work out, it worked out, right? How many times
Right.
do we reflect back now and think, oh, if I hadn't had that job, I wouldn't be doing this and I wouldn't be doing that, but we wouldn't have envisioned it. So I would say that absolutely. But again, the biggest thing is being open to accepting help. I hope so. And also thinking about my father would have been very open to assisted living. My mother refused, and by the time where she could have gone, I could see why she wouldn't because the places are too big and she couldn't see that well, right? So I'm
Mm.
thinking, well, would I want to try that when I'm independent and then to go gradual, to have community because you don't want to just be alone. I have a neighbor who's close to 90 now, and where I live is on top of it's there's a bus, but it's not in the city, and he admits he should have moved because he doesn't see that many people. And I don't,
Yeah.
and I think it's important to be around people. I mean, always. I mean, a lot, but particularly when you can't sit around as much. So,
Yeah. 100%.
yeah.
That power of community, we've talked about here on this show as well, especially, in this post-COVID world where a lot of us were really isolated, those of us that had community at work in an office environment, and then all of a sudden we're home, and a lot of those folks never went back, and just aging population. So our parents in that more socially isolated environments, that can be really, really tough. And it 100% has an effect on your overall health, certainly your emotional health, mental health, but also your lifespan, your longevity. So a key
Yes.
part of healthy aging. Yeah, I know that, you're lucky, right? As we said, that your parents were healthy. They lived a nice
Yes.
long time. And before we hit record, I was telling you in our coaching practice, we'll get people coming in, and one of their main motivators for coming in and working with us is because they're watching their parents age poorly and they don't want that to be them, right? So they're probably overweight, they have mobility issues, they probably have decades of poor food choices, let's say, or maybe being sedentary. And so they have all of these, maybe they've got a whole, pill thing full of all the
Mm.
different pills they take throughout the
Oh,
day,
yeah.
right? And that can be challenging as well. Do you have any advice for, say, people listening to this, that's their parents? They're watching their parents just kind of going downhill, but it's almost like they have this. It's too late to teach an old dog new tricks sort of a philosophy, and it can be very frustrating and disheartening and sad really to watch parents kind of going downhill when a lot of it is really lifestyle related.
Absolutely, it is, and that should enough be motivation for them if they really want it to change. I mean, you could take the flip
Yeah.
side of that, Kevin. Some people who are younger who aren't as mobile, but then they have little children and they want to keep up with them, and that might be a reason that
Right.
they go in and they connect with that. I mean, you know that there's intellectually knowing something has to change, there's emotionally knowing something has to change, and then there's
Right.
actually changing it. And I think the fact if they're looking at their elderly parents and going, I don't want that, that's emotional, but what are you going to do about it? And
Right.
it's never too
Yeah.
late to do anything. I learned you can teach an old dog new tricks with my father because we had our I had my best conversations with him after he was 80. We
Wow.
developed a
Yeah.
deeper relationship for a while. He was my business coach in a way. I would talk to him almost every day. It got to where his being concerned father came into play, but I was already in a mastermind group. But because of him, now the mastermind group, still to this day, we meet weekly. Because of him, I wanted more. So, yeah, people can change at any age, but I certainly think developing habits it just starts now, and depending on when the now is, that's just
Right.
what you do. And so I look at that as motivating. There's certain characteristics of both my parents. I don't want to, you know, I'll say to my brother, if you say to me, oh, that's like what mom would say, maybe I'll laugh, but it's like, damn it, I don't
Okay.
necessarily want to do that. Then there's other things you want to embrace, and I think both of those are, should be motivating. So if they're coming, yeah, that's good that they're coming for you for that, and it can change. Absolutely, change it right now. What's one thing you could do right now?
One thing you do today. Yeah. So
Yeah,
there's two sides to that, right? There's the, I don't, I'm looking at my aging parents. I don't want that to be my story. Or, like you said, there's a more positive motivator in I want to be able to play with my grandkids. I want to be able to run around. I want to be able to get down on the floor, wrestle, and get back up and move pain free. So there are those multi generational motivators, I'll say. And I love the idea of what, how do we, if that's a motivator, whether it's a negative motivator, I don't want to age like my parents, or a positive motivator, like I want to be able to play with my grandkids. The best time to start is today, right? What is the saying? The best time to plant an apple tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today, right? So 100%.
it is. And one thing also I learned though is in the 50s, but 60s and then 70s, our time to plan for today is more limited. Because when my parents got to around 90, that this is just general, I'd ask them, "What did you do this morning?" And the answer was, "I had breakfast." And that's what they did. And you could look at it, oh, that's all they did. That's what they can. As you get older, there's less that you do and hope, but if you enjoy it, maybe it's better. It's just as much quality as it's doing a lot of things,
Hmm.
but it's very different as you get older. And so I think when I'm thinking now, my mother, who was an athlete, if she had pursued stretching starting in her 80s as much as she had done the basketball and the tennis, I think she wouldn't have been in as much pain. And since she only did it haphazardly, but she could have made that her morning. It's like it takes. I mean, I'm laughing because the more I stretch now, the more I have to stretch, and if I stretch an hour, it's not enough, right? But I think that yes, you have today, particularly your viewers. Yes, you have today because it does get harder as you go on. It's
Sure.
not that it can't be done,
Sure.
but it gets harder.
Right. Yeah. And we talk about that ad nauseum. That's basically what 300 and something episodes are all about. How do
Yeah.
I age like a badass so that
Right.
I can
Yeah.
roll into my 70s,
Right.
80s, and if I'm blessed enough to be in my 90s and have that full quality of life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm fascinated with this idea of becoming a caregiver for my parents, and then eventually my children doing the same for me. And that's the circle of life, right? So if you were to look back at the entirety of your caregiving journey, are there things you would have done differently? Are there a couple of pieces that you can pull out of that and maybe, go back and tell yourself, hey, this is what I would have done differently? What sort of advice do you have for those of us who are beginning this journey?
Well, yes, of course, there's always things I would do differently. One of them is maybe have a bit more patience. I mean, some of the
Mm,
things I just told you now is upon reflection, right? It's not like I
yeah.
didn't while I was doing that to recognize that this is a finite amount of time. One thing I would continue to do is you have to take care of yourself. And but the biggest thing I would do is not as fight with them as much. That might relate to patience, but and meaning Dad broke his hip in LA in June of whatever year. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're going back to Florida in November. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? Are you out of your minds? and it gave me, headaches and stress. And I will give credit. I forget the guy's name, the guy who wrote the book Being Mortal. You might, that's it's a powerful book on the. It goes over a history of nursing homes, but it also goes over caregiving. And one thing he said is, as parents age, as people age, sometimes the only thing they have left is their ability to make decisions. So they're going to make decisions whether it's right or wrong for them. And that hit me, and I go, well, they want to go back. Of course, they can't go back themselves. So I remember that next morning after arguing, I called my mother. I go, okay, what day do you want to go back? I'm taking you. And of course, the joy in that was she thought I was up to something, but I wasn't.
Hmm.
And you know what? They were correct. They went back several years in a row. At that point, they used to go back on their own. Now either I went, my brother went, and we went and we got them set up. So fighting with them less would definitely be, that's and the patience. Those are the things that I have there. In the last moments of of life, that's a whole different. No matter what, you might have regrets and you might go through guilt instead of just being sorry about something that didn't happen. Particularly if you didn't know it'd be the last moments. But th- basically, those are the things that I would try to do a little bit for my sake, more than anyone else's.
Sure.
Just don't fight them.
Sure.
Don't fight them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love that you start obviously with self-care. I believe in that showing up for others. The best thing you can do there is it starts with a self-care practice, just basic human self-care, and then counseling patients, not trying to avoid arguments, etc. Now, as we're wrapping up here, let's finish at the end. What advice do you have, and maybe from obviously pulling from your own personal experience, how do we overcome grief? How do we grow from grief? Is it possible to say that you can find any kind of joy in grieving, or is that just out there? How do we, again, yeah, how do we turn that grief into growth, and how do we move on?
Well, first, you don't ever stop grieving, I don't think. It's a loss. But
Sure.
what's the reason I moved on? One, it's a part of life, but two, it's to honor the people who have gone, right? Grief
Hmm.
ebbs and flows all the time. It was just a couple of weeks ago I won this great tennis match, and it was touch and go, and literally I thought after, oh, I've got to call mom and tell her about it. I mean, it's been 2 years, and I was parked on a Trader Joe's supermarket, and I'm going in, and this guy walked by me, and he's on the phone. He goes, "Ma, I'll call you back. I'm going into Trader Joe's." And I thought, oh, wouldn't I give anything to just be able to say that, right? There's always going to be that, but I think you have to be able to reflect and go, I did everything I can. You look at yourself and say, I did that, and then and hopefully you move on. Of course there's a lot of support for grief, Kevin. There's a lot of different groups
Hmm.
that you can join, but I think time does have a way of mellowing it and evolving it. But I don't think but turn grief into joy. I mean, you just the memories are great,
That's it.
right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's probably the secret there, isn't it? Yeah, it's honoring the memories of the people that they were, and how I suppose a big part of your parents live on through you and through your children, right? I mean, I certainly see that. I am the product of my environment to a very large part, and that's both genetic environment as well as environment, both of which were given to me either wholly or in large part by my parents. And I suppose that I am a living testament to them. And at the end, that I suppose honoring them, but going through that grieving process, a part of it is almost my responsibility to go out and to make sure that that they're remembered and they're honored through my actions, through my being. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
I think that's an excellent way of looking at it, and everyone's going to do it differently.
Sure.
I have, I remember after my dad died, I was at a party, and this woman just lost her father, and she said to me, "Do you feel like you have a hole in you?" And I go, "That's
Mm.
good." My brother said he felt like he was kicked out of the nest, even though he had his own family. It's like I mean, friends who've died, people when they're younger who die, children lose
Hmm.
their parents at a younger age. It happens at different times. Um, Someone had said to me, and there's no comparison, but they said, wow, the fact that you had your parents for so long could make it harder. I don't know if it makes it harder or not. It just makes it what it is. And I just look at the blessings, I guess. That's
Look at the blessings.
look at the
Yeah. All right.
blessings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I suppose at the end, if there are burdens, clearly, we'll work through those, but they're blessings, and that's the part we need to honor, and that's the part we need to remember. All
Yeah.
right. Well, Howard, as we're wrapping up here, is there somewhere you want to send people? Where do we want to, as we're signing off, where do you want to
Right.
send
Thank you
folks?
for that. Well, I do would love for people, if you want to hear more about my book, you go ahead and go to my website, which is fulcrumpointpartners.com. And there's a page, and why that's not up on my screen right now.
It's
where-
the fulcrumpointpartners.com/over 50 HW, over
Yes,
50
exactly.
HW. And folks, I'll put a link to that in the show notes as
Thank you.
well.
And
Yeah.
you'll be, yes, and your podcast will be linked on mine. Also, you could get the book there. Also, because we didn't dive into it, but all this, believe, and I'm sure you know this, Kevin, when you have levity, it could help in the workplace also.
Mm.
It could, if you know how you could get stressed at work, and how would that, if you get de-stressed. So I'd love to talk to corporations about that. Use the stories of my parents to help companies make more money. There's a slogan
There you
somewhere
go.
on that.
Yeah. Right.
Right, so
Right.
that's where they could find me. And yeah, or just if they have questions. Not that I'm an expert on this stuff, it's just my experience, right? And I make sure I
Yeah.
qualify that. There's so many people out there who have licenses to do certain things, but sometimes people just need to talk to people who've been through it, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Right on.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
All right, folks, that book again is Burdens and Blessings, a lighthearted approach for middle-aged folks dealing with aging parents. Definitely strongly recommend you check that out. You guys can also check out Howard's website. That was fulcrumpointpartners.com. And again, I'll throw links to all of this stuff into the show notes. You guys can find that there. Howard, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, being vulnerable with us, for the great work you're doing there, and I just encourage you to keep up the great work.
This is fun. I felt like we could go on for another hour, but
Right. Yeah, right on.
thank you very much.
Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you are interested in checking out one of our professionally designed, age-appropriate functional strength training programs, I will put a link to those in the show notes. You guys can find that on whatever app you're listening to this on, or you can head over to silveredgefitness.com/338. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to please give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I'd really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.